Hi, this is Jason with Open Design Docs. I'm here with Kevin Wong, Head of Product and Content Design at Webflow. Thanks for joining, Kevin. Appreciate you coming and having this chat.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Jason.
Awesome. So let's just jump in. So you've had a lot of different leadership roles at companies like Airbnb, Meta, and now Webflow. And also before that, you had a lot of earlier experience with different smaller agencies, et cetera. I'd love to understand, and maybe you could just walk us through your career journey and kind of how you ended up getting to the place where you are today in the leadership role that you're in.
It's a great question, and it had me thinking a lot about just where it all started and how I got into design in the first place. I think the first earliest memory I've had about like design was really about visual arts and really loving the artistry behind Disney movies. And I remember just freezing frames and trying to redraw and recreate those scenes. And I think I've always been attracted to that like type of art form. And then once I started to go to school, I learned about these tools like Photoshop, and then that opened up to web design. And I even started out with a couple buddies in high school, a web development company. We had two clients, one of which was my friend's dad's business, where we actually made a little bit of cash, and then another was designing for a local comic book shop, and got some free comics out of that. So I think that like gave me a taste for what it was like to be like in tech and doing design professionally. Um, and yeah, one of my first jobs was working in a design agency, like you mentioned, and really getting exposure to how design plays a big role at different major companies, like Fortune 500 companies. And some of them included like Microsoft and Samsung and HP. And I got to, get a really good sense of what the value of design looked like, what a good process looked like, and really understand different problems that design could solve for. I was able to translate a lot of those learnings to startups afterwards, after learning about all these amazing companies that were being built and started in San Francisco. And so I had moved over there. And, once I was in-house, that's when I actually got my first taste of management and leadership, where I was leading a small team, really trying to bring more of the UX thinking and like user research and applying that to product management and working with a team of designers there that were building out these SaaS products. And I think from that point on, I was in this like sort of period of time where I was thinking about, what is my future career going to look like? Am I going to go down this path of continuing as an IC and doing the design work itself, or was I going to endeavor into management? And so I made the decision, at least at the time, to try out management. And I always told myself that this is something I can always go back to and change my mind. It's perfectly okay. And then I went to join a place like Airbnb, which was awesome because it was a fairly mature design company that had a dual track of leading teams as well as leading initiatives as a design leader. And I found a happy place, and I really enjoyed the work that I did. And then it became just a journey of aligning my interests to where I thought I could have a lot of opportunities and impact, and also a curiosity of like, what does it look like to operate larger scale design organizations? And that's what brought me to Meta for that time being, and where I learned a lot about what it looked like to lead, hundreds, if not thousands of designers under, a multi-branded platform. Then after that, I found myself at Webflow, where I think this has been the real sweet spot for me, where I get to think about not only building and growing design teams, but also building and growing a company and how we can make the whole company one that like values design and takes design seriously as part of our core philosophy of how we build products. And so this has just been a really great learning process in trying to do that in my own way, and taking all the learnings from my past experience to this current opportunity.
Thanks for sharing that. You sound like someone who's been very thoughtful about the path that you've taken. You started early. I love that you earned some comic books for your one of your first jobs ever. Were you always very thoughtful and planned in how you built your career, or were you going a different path, perhaps, for example, just aligning with what your interests or where you found the most inspiration? Like, how did you think about that, even from the early days? Let's say maybe you can go back to, how you studied in college, for example.
Yeah, I think I think I got lucky in some ways, and I do try to put some thought hopefully, into like decisions, especially big decisions. What am I going to do with my life, and how do I want to, spend my time? But yeah, I think I got lucky in that I, was introduced to computers pretty early in my childhood, and part of the story going into college was, I went into the university as a pre-chem major, thinking I was going to go into sciences and study medicine so that I could, develop new um, drugs that would like help people or like treat illnesses. But then I took this class in the informatics program or the school of library school, where we were introduced to this article about this author, Van Everbush, who was this like brilliant scientist at the time and during the World War era. And basically, in this article called As We May Think, he characterized the future of computing and the future of the internet through these, at that time, pretty advanced ideas of storage and hyperlinking. It blew my mind, and I was completely enamored, and it made me realize that the things that I had naturally gravitated towards as a kid just rekindled this passion of mine. And so I immediately changed my major that day. And that was like the first day of freshman year. And then just
That
like,
was the first day of freshman year?
yeah, first day, yeah, first day of freshman year. No, I'm not doing chemistry anymore. I'm going to be in the information school and studying informatics. And I just went down that path, and it was great. And it was a awesome program. It was really new. We learned about technology, and it was you know the intersection of information, people, and technology. It's like that's great. I didn't really see myself as a developer. I tried my hand at computer science early in freshman and sophomore year, and it was hard. I had a really hard time. And, they really made you, work hard to learn things like C++, which is a hard language to learn too. But I think I found, that intersection of people and technology really spoke to me and what I wanted to focus on. But there was another turn in the road where while I loved the program, I also learned I really love design, and I wanted to like get closer to the aesthetic and the form as well as the function of software and technology being created. And I think, it's cliche, but I definitely felt heavily influenced by Apple at the time. And I remember when Steve Jobs had introduced the iPod Nano, I don't know, I just felt so much excitement at the time because I'm like, wow, this guy has built these like beautiful products that has transcended what other companies have been able to do, like through miniaturization and just like great marketing. And I want to be a part of that like same ethos and that same energy. And so I actually found myself studying all my electives at the interaction design program in the art school. So that actually helped me round out my education as far as like technology, arts, and design. And I think those were very formative times of my life that helped me really identify with that role as something that I wanted to do after graduating.
And you went from there to an agency in Washington. This was at the University of Washington you went to college at, correct?
Yeah, at the UW, yep,
Okay. And then you got your first job at a small agency in Seattle area?
in Seattle.
Yeah. And then how did you transition from that to then the Bay Area, where you eventually started to then build your product design career?
Yeah. So funny story is when I was interviewing for roles, it was at a bunch of these different companies. One was Teague, another design agency, um, uh, Steam, not Steam. Oh gosh, what is their name? Valve. Valve is local to Seattle. The creators of Half-Life, and Artifact, which is the agency that I ended up joining. And what's funny is I was getting all these offers and roles as a designer slash prototyper because I was really into Flash. If you remember Flash back then, and but at Artifact, they actually had offered me this user researcher role, even though I thought when I was interviewing, I was interviewing for a design role. But they saw something in me that felt like my skills could be really helpful here. And Artifact was a really cool company because they were really forward thinking about innovation and building, helping other companies reimagine industries about photography or about music or about search, which was all very nascent new industries at that time. This was back in 2007, and so I thought, okay, I want to go down this path and learn a lot from the founders there and learn from other great designers at that company. So I became a user researcher for 5 years, doing amazing work. It was so much fun because I think the cool thing about agency work is that, especially in the early years of your career, you get exposure to so many different like companies and problem spaces. And, I dabbled in things like mobile development, photography, social networks, working on like touch screen washers and dryers, like crazy stuff like that, as well as like maybe unassuming things like tax software, which I thought was great as a young, adult who didn't know a thing about taxes. So I learned a lot from that
Back when
experience.
your taxes were easy.
Yeah, exactly. But hey, it's helped me now, and it helped me appreciate all the rules that are there. And I think the rapid iteration cycles also like gave me a lot of exposure to the craft of like the design process and how to navigate the messy, ambiguous beginnings and middle part, as well as really trying to distill ideas to a very clear proposal and direction and be able to communicate that with clients. I was very fortunate to have that experience, and I think it really helped me set up my time as I consider going in-house. And the story about going in-house was I had spent so much time in this high conceptual space thinking about innovation and helping other companies innovate through design thinking. I realized all these other companies in San Francisco, Bay Area were actually building products and building companies around similar ideas. I just had this itch of wanting to be so much closer to where the work and the innovation was happening that I decided that it was time to go and take the plunge into that space and be a part of where all the fun and the action was happening.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting because, there's a lot of design leaders, I believe, who come from that agency background, the Frog Design, companies like that, where, uh, I think you got the opportunity to learn about really well-honed design processes and then take that into roles internal to companies. So that's great.
Yeah, you remember the shopping cart episode that like IDEO had in like 2020 or 60 Minutes or something like that? They like reinvented the shopping cart and they talked about all the like design decisions that they made about how the wheels worked and the feel of the handlebars and how like they have these hooks that you can hang bags versus the produce and such. And you're like, wow, everyday things, Don Norman now, channeling my inner Don Norman, everyday things were very intentional. They were designed, and that always stuck with me.
Yeah, I love that. So, one thing I noticed when reading about your experience is you've been at a variety of sizes of companies. I'm very curious, as someone who's been a design leader, manager at, maybe going from the Airbnb size to then Meta and then to Webflow. What have you seen in terms of how you lead as a manager at companies of different sizes like that? What are the things that are the same and what are the things that are different?
Yeah, I think it's been it's an interesting question because it's also like I'm learning so much about myself and I'm learning a lot about design leadership through that process of being exposed to different size companies and different cultures. I think that what has always been consistent is that as the design leader, it truly is on you to continually help others understand the value and the impact of design, and that you cannot make any assumptions about why it matters and how it works. So it's always a state of educating and championing and highlighting when good design happens. I found that like every organization comes with their own perspectives about design because companies are made up of people and people come from different places. So they're all going to have different experiences with, what design looked like for them and how it worked. And, you know, hopefully the people that you work with have had good experiences with working with a great designer where you've had great outcomes and designed really great products. And so the question is like, how do you recreate that? And so you got to look at, where are other people coming from? How do you incrementally build the rituals and the culture in a way that, helps people really absorb and understand how it works for their own process and find those moments to celebrate and win. And I think the other thing that I've learned is it takes time to build that trust, build that momentum. Sometimes it's really fast, and sometimes you're working on good foundations. And I think that, as I've joined companies over time, one of the questions I started asking myself is, what is the state of design maturity? And I think some of that is like, do the founders care about design? Do they value really understanding the impact of having good design aesthetics and valuing beauty as much as function? And also, I think the competitive landscape, where is design going to be a differentiator because the market is so saturated with solutions and innovation around like new technology um, is just one key aspect of it. But you also believe that usability and comprehension of that experience, like really meeting where people are, is going to be the additional like edge to win as a company. So that's the thing I try to like look for nowadays and help me, decide how I want to support and, learn and grow.
That's a lot to unpack. I love it. It's like your entire philosophy, which is great. Let's maybe we like go back a little bit because I'd love to dig into pieces of that a little bit more. You spoke about rituals. What did you see as the difference in rituals between these various companies that you've worked at? I'm very curious because they all also have a very different culture. Airbnb is very design led, founder design led culture,
Mhm.
meta engineering led. I don't know about Webflow. I assume more engineering. Maybe it's a cross between both. But I'd love to understand like how those rituals changed between those companies, both from a size perspective and how the ritual changed, but also just from a culture perspective.
Yeah, I think at Airbnb, the rituals, it was very design centric and much more design led than a lot of companies that I've worked at before. Everything that you worked on went through a design review, and it went through our design leadership. It also went up to Brian Chesky. So, and I think that that process is really what helped create a lot of cohesion and integrity in terms of the way our brand is represented, both in the product as well as in the marketing. And that I think is what made Airbnb so successful is that you really got a sense of what Airbnb represented at every single touch point and every single moment that you experience with the company. And that's what actually like really drew me to Airbnb in the first place was because it was such an online offline experience and you really had to think end to end. And I think that's also why our titles were experience designers, not like product designer, they're not UI designers, we were experience designers because we had to think so broadly. Um, and we have typical things like design crits and design reviews. I think it's just that the design review process was a lot. I'd say like there's a lot more depth to it. Depth meaning the people and the stakeholders that you worked with, as well as the level of detail, excruciating detail that you would, pick apart in order to, make sure it felt right and it worked right. When I look at Meta, I think the hard thing is that it's such a big company that there's no one uniform culture. Instagram's culture, very different from WhatsApp, which is also different from Messenger, which was the org that I was a part of, and also with Facebook, which was called Blue at the time. And I think even within that is very different. Like I think at the time, Meta or Facebook had a much bigger experimentation culture. It's like such a mature product that they were doing both big swings and big like brand changes, but also lots of like experiments that would happen simultaneously. So I think in some ways the design reviews may still happen, but there's also a like let's test and learn quickly in order to understand like what has legs and then really double down on those efforts. And I think it works for that scale and that type of business because you can literally learn something in a matter of days or weeks because you have that many users and interactions that helped you get really strong signals about the promise of a design change and how it would impact the user and how it would impact the business. So I think that you kind of have to recognize like, yeah, what are the how does a business work and how does that affect how you learn in order to make really good design decisions? But I think it's also a situation where you also have to like trust that as a designer, especially through your time in honing your intuition and using your experience, you also are making your own judgments and you're sharing your own perspectives about what it is that you need to do strategically from a design perspective, like pushing a brand update. And, the goal may not be to always create a change in a metric, but making sure you don't take any metrics because you believe strategically we need to make an information architecture update, or we need to make sure that our brand starts to feel cohesive because it's gotten so fragmented over time. So I think really understanding the goals too can change, the way you think about.
What did you take from those rituals? You talk about Meta and Airbnb being very different and makes a lot of sense as to why, and sort of the maturity of the company, the size of the teams, et cetera. And maybe also the culture between engineering experimentation culture versus, I know being at Airbnb, it was less about experimentation and more about maybe trying to feel what was right. Is a little more intuitive than experimental. What of those things did you take with you to create the rituals and the culture at Webflow?
Yeah. Um, so I think that designers who are working in this space of ideating and even just like unpacking problems, it's a really fragile state to be in and easily influenced by things like constraints and um, the realities of feasibility and state of technology. And so I think it is important that we consider that. But I also want to make sure that designers also feel they have the space and the ability to concentrate on what is going to be the optimal or ideal experience for a problem a person or a customer has. And to try and explore the boundary conditions of what can be, um, and having a moment in time where we can kind of share that with the rest of the company and really challenge things like our own assumptions and our own beliefs of what is possible. And so I think that's like a very important first step whenever we endeavor into any kind of like design process. And so we want to, what I've taken is like using certain rituals to help create that kind of space and to invite that kind of discussion. So we do a couple of things at Webflow. So one, we have design crits that are weekly for organized by every pillar. And so every pillar, there's enough context with designers there who can understand the nature of the problem that they're trying to solve, the customer that they're solving for, and the ways that their surfaces that they are owning behave. So, there's already some intuition and built-in understanding of like what's going to build on top of our system and what's going to break the system. We have our
When
designer.
you
Yeah.
say when you say crits by pillar, does that mean that those are internal crits to that specific team?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
design
great.
crits, just design teams, team members. They're about like, 5 designers for every pillar. And so they meet weekly to, share, what problem they're working on, explorations that they've done, and then ask for specific feedback, whether it's like, is this the right even framing of the problem? And, here are some directions. Which of these feels stronger than the other? We have design reviews, which we've treated more as a way of driving alignment around how a design is going to impact the broader platform. So as you scale, you don't every designer doesn't have the same visibility or level of context about how the rest of the product is evolving. And design reviews are great because it's a chance for designers to present to our design leadership team, and we get to help share feedback about where there are points of interoperability that need to be taken into consideration.
How do you conduct those design reviews? Are those the whole team is there, or how does that actually work?
Yeah, so how the design reviews work is we have our reviewers, so that's our design leads. They represent each of the pillars. So these are directors and managers. The presenters are going to be the designers who are leading the project. And then they have the option of inviting their PM and anyone else on the cross functional team. Sometimes it's the researcher who joins, sometimes it's engineering partners or engineering managers. We really don't want to restrain or constrict who can go. We end up sharing the outcomes of the design review in a public channel on Slack. So everyone can follow along regardless of whether they're attending or not, or even if they're a part of the project or not. And it's somewhat structured. We want people to bring work across the phases of our general like feature development lifecycle. What's the context? What's the problem? Do you have a hypothesis, or like what's what's your strategy? And then what's the focus of the review? Is this to evaluate the direction? Is it to evaluate a trade-off? Or is it to look at more of like the final version before we go out with it, and how we can make sure it is working with our design system and that they're leveraging patterns in a way that helps us create consistency as we scale as a team.
That's great. Are these also, do you also conduct product reviews in addition to design reviews? Is that a different audience?
Yeah, so we also have product reviews. There's by pillar, which is a great opportunity to understand all phases of development, not just like within design, but also from a product perspective. Is it the right problem to solve? Do we have a good understanding of the opportunity and the impact it's going to have on the business? As well as later in execution, what are we uncovering about the feasibility and what are those unknown unknowns that we have to revisit design decisions or revisit requirements? So that happens at a per pillar level cross functionally. And then we have our leadership product reviews where we manage both the general like direction of the strategy, and then we have release planning. So things that go from what we call okay to build, which is okay, we've done the homework, we have an idea of what this version we want to release is going to look like and how it's going to work, and we're ready to put all of our engineering resources against it to build and implement as quickly as possible. Engineers are involved in the early phases as far as like general scoping and doing tech spikes to understand the technical vision and technical direction. This is when we start to really pull in, many more engineers to rapidly build some feature or some system. Then it goes through like our typical like alpha, beta, and GA releases.
I love that. It seems incredibly structured. Slightly switching gears, it also feels like, unlike Airbnb and Meta, where you're working on products that were really consumer facing products, I'm very curious the difference in working on a tool like Webflow, which is for developers and designers, but feels like you'd have to be much more rigorous around how you work on something like that and how you experiment with that versus a product like Messenger or Airbnb, like Homes or something like that.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a really good question because, you can almost look in the mirror and ask yourself, like, how do I respond when Figma makes changes to our design tools? And in a way, like we are designing for ourselves and for people who are of similar persona. Like we have these tools that we rely on every day that really helps with our livelihoods. So making this tool work for our customers is so important. And that kind of pressure is also a privilege for us in that, it is high stakes, but we get to, own that and try to do our best job making good decisions and being cognizant of how we make those changes and roll out those changes. With Webflow, we talk about like moving the cheese and, no one likes it when you move the cheese. You have to relearn your muscle memory. You have to, that takes time away and attention from like doing the actual job that, you're trying to do. So change management is certainly difficult. And I think that we have to take experimentation with a very different mindset where you can't always just like run an experiment and say that didn't work and then change it back. Like that really affects people. And there's like a smaller population compared to Meta, which is like, in the billions. So I do think that's where these processes like doing user research or having our own like trusted counsels internally to vet and evaluate ideas in that process and like co-creating and having more deliberate beta programs gives us more control over getting the feedback, making sure we're taking in and iterating on that feedback and learning in that process.
I love that book, Who Moved My Cheese? That's a great one. How do you all, or do you dog food your own product as designers at Webflow?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of, we call it like drinking our own champagne or eating our own ice cream, because dog food doesn't taste good. Never tried it, but I can't imagine it does. But yeah, we definitely do it. I think we can do more of it. So what does that look like? We have build days. So build days are ways for us to internally test as a team new features that we're building. And so we'll have scripts that helps us understand really like kind of like a QA process. What would it feel like and how would it work if we followed what we imagine a customer would typically do. So that's been really great. We also try to turn on features once they hit alpha as an internal feature flag, so you can use those as you will. One of the great things about Webflow is that we also have a phenomenal brand and web marketing team who are also like diehard Webflow users. Our homepage is powered by Webflow. A lot of our properties are powered by Webflow. So they are such a huge component of the feedback that we get in and the insights that we can, you know, get throughout the process, not just like when we're testing, but also like early on as we start to formulate, a direction and a strategy of, where these features should go.
As we talk more about Webflow, I'm curious how you build a team of designers. What are the skills you look for a team that's working on a tool like this versus the type of designers who may be at a more of a consumer facing type of company, like a Messenger, for example? Like, what do you look for? Is it different?
Yeah. So, I'll start with the things that are like very common, very, very similar. Where we look for designers who are very much like generalists and who can really own the end-to-end process. They understand what good research looks like and can even, have host an interview with a customer. They are also thinking strategically and have good product sense. How does this product fit? How does this solve a problem? And then also the design aspects of it, good interaction design, good systems thinking, as well as the visual design piece. We care a lot about prototyping. Prototyping, the tools these days makes it impossible not to prototype. And I think that prototypes can save so much time in terms of debates about how something can work or understanding the requirements of the experience. I do think a prototype can save you thousands of hours. So I think that is very much a key part that I've seen consistently across every team and company that I've been a part of. Prototyping has been like one of those key traits that we often look for and have found to be really effective. What I think is pretty unique about Webflow, unlike other teams that I've been a part of, is the level of technical knowledge that enables you to be really effective at making hard decisions or understanding the ways in which we're trying to abstract controls that are going to be more understandable and usable for less technical users. Like we're truly building like a control layer, an abstraction layer on top of core like web primitives, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Like you really have to understand like what these things are and how they work, familiar with, W3C standards. And that I think allows you to, understand, yeah, what is going to break norms and what is going to build on top of, understood conventions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And are you all remote, hybrid, in person? How does the company operate right now?
Yeah, we're all remote. It's a remote first company. It was remote before it was cool. And
I'm not so sure it's cool anymore, but
yeah, yeah, it doesn't seem like it. Well, we still think it's cool. But we do have a San Francisco office that people do show up at. But otherwise, we're located all across the world. We have folks in Europe. We have folks all across the US and Canada. Um,
that's your
and
team? Your team is all over the world?
My team's all over the world. Yeah, we have someone in London, someone in Poland. I think that makes up most of the folks overseas, and then all throughout East, West, Mid.
So I have a couple follow-ups related to that then, because I have experience with remote and global as well. It has definitely challenges with that. I guess the first is, how do you build a strong design culture in a fully remote global team? What are the ways that you have found worked best for that?
Yeah, it's tough. I think one, having like regular times to meet is really key. So we do a couple things. We have our bi-weekly stand-ups. which is a way for everybody to get together, share one thing that they're working on. And, you go around the horn and everyone gets a chance to celebrate and see like all the great stuff that people are doing. And totally took this from Airbnb. Thank you, Katie, for introducing this like phenomenal,
I do
ritual
the
for
same
us.
exact thing.
It's so good. It's so good. It's my favorite time of the week. And then, we do get together as a team. So we have a whole company retreat. So that's been awesome to be face to face and reconnect and talk about, who we are as a team and just have fun, casual time together. This past holiday, a couple weeks ago, we did a cookie decorating event for folks remote. So just looking for those times where it's not about work and just more about hanging out as fellow humans and just learning about each other's interests and appreciating our lives outside of work too.
Was the cookie making a remote experience?
Yeah. It was remote.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah. We also do these monthly meetings. So it's more of a PD all hands event. And we do a mixture of a top of mind updates from myself. Plus, we'll invite designers to do like deep dives of things that they've worked on. So it's a good way of like learning from each other. And then, like fun icebreakers just to make it engaging and ways to also get to know each other. It's really great for new people too, to also get a chance to, meet the rest of the team.
So, global remote, how do you ensure quality, consistency of the product when you're dealing with time zones from around the world?
Yeah, I think we've been good about setting expectations around time zones and when are people working together. So our folks in European area work East Coast times, so we do have some overlap. Some of our West Coast people work East Coast times because their engineers also work in that same time zone. So we have a fair amount of overlap, which I think helps with attendance and participation in these like synchronous meetings. We are also heavy users of Loom, which has been just an incredible tool to not only like present your work, but also like see people and like hear their voice, which I think it also just plays into like really building bonds with others. So I think that's been a real transformative way of like communicating with each other, even though it's asynchronous and still getting a lot of value in terms of feedback and, you know, having the comments be aligned to whatever portion of the video that they've recorded for you. So that's been really great too.
How do you think about designers earlier in their career? So much of my early time learning as a designer was being able to peer over the shoulder of someone who was better than me. How do you replicate that in a remote global company when you have, I assume you have more junior designers on the team. How do you replicate that experience for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. We do it in a couple of different ways. One, for any given project, especially if there's going to be um, a lot of like dependencies or interoperability, we do like to make sure designers are spending time together in their design process to work on problems together. And so that ends up being like sometimes a mix of like someone who's more senior, who has the experience and can offer guidance on what patterns to consider and how to navigate certain decisions because we're working on shared surfaces. We also have very explicit mentoring program. So we started last 2 years ago now a PD product design mentorship program. So we'll do internal matching around key interests and make sure people are set up to have that one-on-one time and are able to bring any questions that they want and work through their opportunities for growth and development. And then of course there's like managers who try to do some of the like connecting and making sure people are working with each other and talking with each other and taking opportunities to learn.
Yeah, I love that. Switching gears for a second, you also talked about prototyping and how much of a prototyping culture you believe in and exists at the company. And you mentioned the tools that exist today and how that's changed prototyping. I think we all are familiar or are becoming familiar with how much AI may be disrupting things. I mean, it might, even when I think about Webflow, like how it's a challenge to Webflow and how Webflow works and, the tools you all build.
Mhm.
But I'm curious what impact or how you're seeing people adopt these new tools, AI tools, as part of the design process.
Yeah. Um, I'm so excited about AI and what it's doing in terms of helping bring ideas to life. Webflow has our own set of AI capabilities that, we're building in, and I think we're also learning a lot from where it fits into the actual workflows of users. But I think broadly, where I see a lot of the AI capabilities and having played with a number of them, they're still in the state of like being really good, maybe a little bit past the first draft now. Like I think they were maybe about a year ago. It's like you got that good first draft. You get a good scaffold, you get a good sense of how something might be structured or laid out, and you can instantly share that and start like driving conversations, which at the end of the day, that's what prototypes are for. They're a way to help facilitate decision making and conversations through some visual medium. Um, I do think that as models get better and as companies start to really hone in on specific use cases, we'll start to see more and more, like fully functional prototypes that allow you to get much further down the stack. I see our team starting to trying to incorporate some of those types of capabilities internally. Like we are building on some functional programming languages to recreate a lot of our own internal tooling or, sandboxes of Webflow so that we can get more fidelity in how things work. Um, but yeah, I think we're experimenting and we're learning about how to continue to make that a part of our own um, design process.
How do you all think about AI tools and, how you balance bringing those into Webflow versus this potential disruption of businesses like Webflow? Like, how do you think about that today in terms of the future of where this industry is going?
Yeah, I think we all have to embrace the fact that what AI capabilities are going to be as pervasive and uh, natural part of computing. The same way we went from, terminal to a GUI, and the same way we went from, on-prem to cloud-based computing. So I think we all recognize like it's here, and we have to figure out um, what that changes for ourselves in terms of how Webflow works and how we think about the creative process of designing and building sites. I think if anything, it accelerates a lot of the parts of the design process. We've seen it accelerate content generation. We've seen it accelerate uh, building structures and helping scaffold page designs. Reloom is a really great example of like amazing ways that they're thinking about helping people go from zero to like pretty robust looking, functional websites. So I think we are also excited about how those things may show up in our own portfolio. I do think the thing that Webflow also cares about, beyond just like designing the website is the entire web development lifecycle. So, this past year we've put a lot of energy into beyond the build. So once you have a site, how do you understand how it works? And that's where insights comes into play and analytics. How do you drive more conversion? How do you make sure the site works and is actually valuable to the business? That's where a lot of our optimize capabilities comes into play. But now that we have partnered and acquired IntelliMize, we have since then launched a optimized set of features that allows you to personalize and test and find the right winning version of the site that converts. And so we're going to be doing a lot more of that kind of work, enabling designers, marketers, and developers, content editors. And I think we'll look at AI as a way to, you know, either automate or shorten the time spent on those rote tasks, and then allow people to really think about the strategic part. What's the right campaign? What's the message that I want to get out there? How should our brand be positioned? I think there's a lot of value in that, and a lot of value in giving marketers more ways to scale themselves and designers to scale themselves because they're also being asked to do more, a lot more bigger scope, smaller teams, smaller budgets, and those are real pressures, right? That we need to help people solve for.
Yeah, it's funny you said that at the end because I think a lot about AI. I actually have found myself that it just creates the assumption that everyone can just move faster. It doesn't mean that there's less people, they're just doing more. in a shorter period of time. And, I think inevitably that's always the challenge of design. It's like the speed versus quality conversation. I think AI just puts the speed on steroids a little bit. I
Yeah,
guess
I do also like, I mean, with AI, in some ways it's like an average of a regression towards the mean of like it takes, knowledge of all things that have existed and tries to like give you a version of it. But I've yet to see it really think outside the box or, deviate in ways that are, going to really alter taste and direction. So I think that's actually a really interesting, like, greenfield, longer time horizon question in my mind of how does the role shape and change when there's more automation and the floor has been lifted to some average. So the differentiation now is like going beyond that average and how one can spend their time in that space.
it reminds me of how when you have a really robust design system in place, designers can spend 80% of their time thinking and 20% of their time designing. And then with tools like AI tools allowing people to move faster and maybe even doing some of that foundational work that you don't have to do as much anymore, I think it really is just unlocking more of that thinking time, and which I think is really what we as designers want to be doing, especially on the product side. I have one final wrap up question for you, which is, as you think about your career, I'd love to know if you have any advice to designers who are looking to get into leadership and, sort of transition into that. Anything that you might share with them looking back on your own career and your time as a leader?
It's a, I think what has always helped me, in my own journey is thinking about what kind of leader you want to be and what kind of leader you don't want to be, and also how that like aligns with your own values and what also gives you energy. I think throughout the different managers that I've ever had in my life, like there are a few that I always think back to and reflect on my time interacting with them and try to pull out what did I love about the way that they managed and worked with me, and how did they help me. And as I have grown, it also helps me remember like, oh, that's what they were trying to tell me back then that I understand now or see their perspective. So paying attention to the leaders that you admire and understanding like why you admire them. And it doesn't have to be, all of the characteristics, but the ones that really stood out to you. And then treat it like, it's like one piece of who you are and find all those pieces and then create your own leadership style. I think when you start to really pay attention to, the things that how you want to show up, I think it allows you to have more authentic leadership practices. It feels, more genuine. And I think that that genuineness with leadership will be felt by the people that you lead to. I think it's a lot of introspection, but, and a lot of observation. But I think that what I want people to take away is we don't have to be all the same type of leader, and that everyone is going to bring a unique perspective that's going to make sense for companies at different stages, different industries, and different, people that you're going to be managing. So don't feel like you have to fit within a box.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate your time. I think it's been really eye-opening to me, and also I'm sure a lot of people can learn from it.
It was so much fun. Anytime to just like hang out with you. I know it's been years since we got to work together, but I loved being on this podcast and I love what you're doing. I think
Thank
it's
you.
really cool that you get to really invite people and share another side of them that may not always come through and, talk about, you know, how we became where we are and that we're all still on this journey of learning and figuring things out. Cause I don't know about you, but I'm still just trying to figure things out.
I mean, I feel like my life would be boring if I wasn't still trying to figure it out.
Yeah,
All right.
totally.
Well, thanks so much.